And welcome, everybody. Of course, we have our friend Ed Dowd joining us today. Ed has been on the show before. He's a former Wall Street analyst. He's a numbers cruncher, and he's noted some very interesting things, including excess deaths among working age Americans since 2020 to 2021. He has been continuing to crunch those numbers, and he's going to give us an update today. Reminder that he is founding partner of Finance Technology, Pianance. You can find out more at financetechnologies.com. Follow Ed on Twitter, DOWD Edward, Dowd Edward on Twitter and Getter. He has also launched the Humanity Project, and I just my crack producer and wife have asked me to get some commentary from
not on crack,
but the exceptionally capable producer and wife has asked me to get some comments from Ed about his financial forecasting as well. So we'll get that right into the beginning of the program as well. Yes, Susan? Good.
And he is our number one.
He's our number one viewed guest. Let's get right to it.
Our laws as it pertains to substances are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
And I neglected to say that, of course, we are joined today by our partner, Dr. Kelly Victory. He'll be here in the show in a few minutes. Also, we're, as usual, out on Twitter Spaces and hopefully have a chance to take a couple questions off Spaces. And I'm watching you all on the Restream chat and also over at the Rumble Rants. And I want everyone to ignore Dr. Drew live chat from Facebook, who is some sort of scam, so please avoid that at all costs.
I think I blocked him, but I'm not
good.
Sure.
Well, we tried to block him,
and
so
I can
we'll
block anybody I want. Just
and
so you know.
And by the way, I think you have the capacity to block people on Rumble now too.
But I haven't had to.
That's good. Everyone's behaving themselves. So let's bring our friend Ed Dowd in. As I said, Ed has been former Wall Street analyst and BlackRock portfolio manager, and pattern recognition and numbers are his thing. Ed Dowd, welcome.
Hey, Dr. Drew. Thanks for having me back on. Good to be here.
So as I promised, before we get into the numbers around COVID and vaccines and sudden deaths and whatnot, give us a little perception, a little taste of what your numbers tell you about the economy and banking. This comes directly from Susan. She's very anxious to hear she relies on your impressions and numbers quite a bit. She's interested in where you are with the economy.
Yeah, so my team that has done a lot of the numbers with the vaccine work. We also have our day jobs, which is economic analysis. In August and November of last year, we predicted a recession coming in the first half of this year. We use early cycle indicators, fundamental economic cycle indicators, and they told us that the economy was sliding into a recession. The other thing that we're worried about is that everyone's talking inflation. We're now thinking deflation. And why do we say that? We say that because the money supply, M2, year-over-year rate of change, year-over-year growth went negative in November, starting in November of last year. Not to sound too alarming, but it must be said, this has happened 4 prior times since 1868. The last time this happened was 1930. And the other times before 1930 were associated with financial panics. And sure enough, this started in November, and Silicon Valley Bank is the first of what I think will be many problems going forward. So the world isn't going to end, but it's going to get, this recession will be difficult, hard and deep. And I've been recommending to people, don't try to trade this and make money. Just this is return of capital, not return on capital. So I've been recommending if you have money, survive. And if you have under the insured amount in a bank, don't worry about it. If you have more money than that, you might want to go to money market funds. These are mutual funds with short-term duration instruments where they're very safe. Or if you're even more paranoid, you can go to Treasury Direct and invest in T-bills and roll the 3-month T-bill every 3 months and wait for the storm to pass and be like the big boys, JP Morgan of old, buy when there's blood in the streets, and that day will come. There'll be a meeting of all the dignitaries at the Fed, the Treasury, the Senate, the president, and they will be declaring that the world is ending or scaring us into believing that. And that's when you buy. You buy when everyone's selling. And that day is not here yet. It's coming.
Yeah, it's just a couple of comments on the margin. I mean, it feels like the Fed is not going to stop until there is a recession. I mean, they just seem relentless. It's so obvious. They also seem that in terms of, I think they're trying to contract the money supply after oversupplying money, and so it's not surprising to me that, I mean, just what's coming off the books from these bank failures is just, and that's accelerating. The only scary thing I would say is if there is a real deflationary trend, those are very difficult to stop. Those don't stop easily. And when they do try to stop them, they move fast. So while the rate increases may be slow, the other direction may be very quick, very, very speedy.
Yeah. And one thing people should understand is that there's a little known fact that the Fed does not have as much control over markets as people might believe. They're led by the market. And the interest rate forward curve as of Wednesday, when they made their decision, the federal funds futures curve is predicting 4 rate cuts. So what the bond market is saying is that the Fed's going to have to cut soon. If the Fed continues to raise, I would suggest that that's a problem, and they're going to make the recession harder and deeper. So they're
going to break. They're going to break stuff. They're going to break stuff. And
yes,
I never, the 2-year fell apart. And in the face of that, he literally said the bond market is wrong. I've never seen a Fed chairman say something like that. Is that just me, or is that did that strike your ear also?
That struck my ear because the market is the collective wisdom of everybody, and that's
Never
where
wrong.
the bets lay out.
Rarely wrong.
It's rarely wrong, and a lot of my predictions that I make are based off market signals and asset classes. I'm not just pulling stuff out of thin air. And so we had economic numbers going down, then the asset markets lined up. So look, if this thing was to get bullish, I would come in here and pull a 180. But right now, I don't see anything but deflation and economic downturn ahead for the time being.
So let's switch that skill set over to what you're seeing now in the aftermath of COVID. I'm going to ask you to hold off on presenting your loss of work data until Kelly gets in here. I want to give her a crack at that. But I have a couple of other sort of general questions or comments. Was I'm noticing, I've been listening to your numbers very carefully, and I've been very worried about what is vaccine and COVID, what is COVID, and I still don't see anybody asking those questions. But I do see a campaign. It seems a systematic campaign to show data on COVID's impact on health long term. Are you noticing that same trend?
Yes, and look, as I said when I first started talking to you guys, we didn't get down into is it COVID, not COVID, vaccinated. We just count ones and zeros, and there's big, giant signals there. And at the time I first came on your show, you were very brave. The idea of discussing the vaccine wasn't really considered cool. Well, now the good news is because of shows like yours, that subject is now, we're able to ask questions now. So I'm very grateful to you and others that allowed us to start to get this conversation. Now we can debate all day long what it is. I'm as the data rolls out, me and my team and I at Finance Technologies are more than 150% convinced the vaccine is causing the majority of the signal we're seeing. Are there some suicides in there? Sure. Are there some fentanyl deaths? Sure, but not enough to cause these types of indicators to go off the rails in the different data sets we're looking at: group life insurance, disabilities, and now the data I'll present to you a little later with Kelly. So that's what I do is called the analyst mosaic. We have a thesis, and we make calls before all the information is available. And I'm sure over time, the doctors with their scientific studies will map out the pathologies that are causing what we're seeing in these big signals.
Is your sort of data being more readily received? You said we at least ask these questions. Are you able to sort of get into a conversation with people that may have been completely shut off to the idea before?
Yeah. So again, you and I have talked about this on your show before. I shouldn't exist as as a person on the scene because this should have been stopped long ago. But I've noticed my social media metrics are starting to go off the hook, and I think that's an indication of an awareness and a willingness to look at my data. And I've noticed that it's the population of people coming into my social media, my LinkedIn, messaging me are from all walks of life, blue, red, different races. There's no longer just the what I used to call the red meat crowd who are suspicious of this from the get-go. It's the word is spreading, which is very good. And again, let's get this conversation on the table.
Yeah. I have a really kind of this is a complete sidebar in a weird way, but maybe it makes sense to you in the context of what we're talking about. Excuse me. Which is, I found it exceedingly odd during the congressional testimony by the Moderna representatives. I think it was last week. It might have been earlier this week, where the usual gadflies were there asking about pricing on the vaccine. And the Moderna, I think it was actually Bernie who asked about the vaccine price. And the Moderna executive's response was, well, we've increased the price to $130 per vaccine because nobody wants it. I am certainly no economic expert, but I thought decreased demand led to decreased pricing. Am I missing something there, or is there inelasticity in medical products, or what? What struck me was what caused him to say that with such confidence, as though it was obvious why he was increasing the prices.
Well, you're correct. In normal economic theory, when demand goes down, you lower price to increase the units sold. So what does this say to me? What it says to me is he's raising the price to sell it to those who are still compelled to take it through whatever mandates are left at colleges, for first responders, wherever.
Wow.
So he's
Wow.
gouging those who are still under the color of law to take. So literally, this is not good, Dr. Drew. This is kind of evil, in my humble opinion.
So it caught your ear too, because it jumped out at me, and I thought nobody's going to follow up on that. That's kind of striking. It's kind of odd that nobody asked the question. Just one question: don't prices go down when demand is down? This is the kind of stuff that you end up screaming at your television about when you're watching congressional testimony. Was there anything in the recent testimony that caught your ear beyond that?
Yeah. So he was being. Senator Rand Paul was asking about myocarditis in the very young age group, 16 to 24, I think. And his answer was that it's actually, there's a study, or he didn't name the study. He said some study proved that the vaccinated get less myocarditis than the unvaccinated. Senator Rand Paul said that that's a complete lie. And then he said no. And then Senator Rand Paul said, I talked to your president offline earlier, and he said definitely agreed with me that yes, the vaccinated are getting myocarditis in that age group more than the unvaccinated. So he lied to the senator, and then he also contradicted his own president at his firm. And I want to give a little color that I know about Bansal, the CEO of Moderna. There are good venture capitalists out there that invest with good people, and one venture capitalist had the opportunity to, years ago, before Moderna arrived on the scene with this vaccine, to invest with Mr. Bansal. And I'm not going to name this VC, but the comment was, we passed on it because we couldn't get over the fact that the CEO was a pathological liar. That was their decision not to go with Moderna in the initial rounds of financing. I find that quite interesting, and that seems to have been borne out by the congressional testimony.
And that was the CEO who was before Congress, while the president was the one who seemed to be more forthcoming. Is that accurate?
Or forthcoming offline with Senator Rand Paul, yes.
Right. I just want to make sure I get the players right here.
Steve Bansal is the CEO.
Always so uplifting to hear these stories. My goodness. All right. Before we bring Kelly in here, anything else that I should be sort of scrounging around into? Anything new that you're thinking? Anything that you've seen? Again, in this sort of this more qualitative area of people shutting people down who raise issues, people lying before Congress, things that are sort of Any pieces of the puzzle coming together for you in terms of how we got here?
How we got here is still, again, the who and the why. We're going to have to adjudicate that, and that's above my pay grade. But it seems to me there was a conspiracy of interests, and they all saw a money grab. And you don't need it. You don't have to imagine again a bunch of evil men in a room drinking scotch, smoking cigars. The momentum was unleashed, and then it just went, and it built. The roller coaster just started snowballing. The snowball started going down the mountain and turned into a boulder. And so we can start there. There may be some really evil people involved, but we don't even need to go there. I think this just was a conspiracy of interest, and it just got, and a lot of things went off the rails.
Are you looking at international data at all? Because there's many countries are pushing back considerably on young people taking the vaccine. And I've always taken the position that I see the risk reward in people over 60, 65. I've never seen it in the younger group, even though I just interviewed a UK woman last week who had some compelling data around pregnancies and pregnancy outcomes. And of course, there's alternative data out there as well. So it's still hard to get your head around what's actually going on. But certainly many countries are pulling back aggressively. Have you looked at any of that?
Yes. Yeah. So at the Humanity Project, we've analyzed all of the European excess death data, the UK, Germany. So I believe on your show we actually broke the Denmark data, which was extremely bad.
Mm-hmm.
They had excess deaths every year going up in every age cohort. So 22 was above 21, 21 was above 20 in terms of excess deaths in every age cohort. They came out and basically effectively banned the vaccine for under 50. There's some wording around it, but they're not offering it the boosters anymore.
Yeah.
And the UK apparently as well is doing the same thing. So there's now this beginning. And again, look, will we ever get a government to come out and say, yes, this was a mistake? I doubt it. I think this is more of what we're going to see is kind of this slow I call it the Homer Simpson back into the hedgerow meme thing, where they just kind of try to walk out of this as gingerly as they can. That's kind of, I think, where we are.
Yeah, I don't know that people are going to let them off the hook quite that easily, especially since there are some really serious vaccine injuries out there and people kind of know some of that. I know it's going to be very interesting as this unravels. I certainly been watching what's going on in the UK, and they're having great difficulty sort of stepping forward with any kind of clarity. I don't know. I've seen some very odd footage of some of the testimony in the parliament, and I just don't. I don't know. I hope it's not sinister, as you say. I hope it's just. There's Homer. There it is. All right.
There it is. That's what they're trying to do.
It certainly seems like it. So with that Homer meme, let's take a little break and bring Dr. Kelly Victory in here. I think you know how much Susan and I love our Genucel skincare and how easy it is to try our one-of-a-kind customer packages bundled with our favorite products. Susan realized the other day that one of our kids stole some of our deep correcting serum from our stash, if you will. We had no idea that the lactic and hyaluronic acid combo is so great for adult acne, dark marks, and scars. So not only are Susan and I hooked on these products, but apparently somebody else in our family is too. Somebody's ripping it off.
I know I'm a snob about the products I use on my face. Everybody knows it. Every time I go to the dermatologist's office, they're just rows and rows of different creams. Retinols, vitamin C cream, under eye cream, night creams.
Scrubs.
And then when I get to the counter, they're overpriced. All kinds of products that you can all find at Genucel.com. I've fallen in love with this product at a fraction of the price. I've been using Genucel for 6 months now, and I'm very impressed.
Great skincare is important at any age, and we love how amazing the results are. Thank you to Genucel. Plus, now you can find your very own bundle based on your unique skincare needs. Using cutting-edge AI skincare technology, you can get a full skin analysis instantly and create a skincare regimen tailored towards your needs. Visit Genucel.com/Drew to check out our favorites and enter that promo code DREW, D-R-E-W, at checkout for added savings. All orders include free shipping and a free mineral mask, Order now. Go to genucel.com/Drew. That is Genucel, Genucel, genucel.com/Drew. Buy gold and get a free safe to store it in. You heard right. On qualifying purchases from Birch Gold Group now through March 31st, they will ship you a free safe directly to your door. Here's the deal. Fed keeps raising rates because it is the only tool they have to keep inflation under control. But it isn't working. You can't spend your way out of inflation. And you've seen the impact on the stock market. You've seen the impact on your savings. Hedge inflation by owning gold, whether physical gold and silver in your safe or through an IRA in precious metals where you can hold real gold and silver in tax-sheltered retirement accounts. Birch Gold has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of satisfied customers. Visit birchgold.com/Drew for your free info kit on gold and to claim eligibility for your free home safe by March 31st on qualifying purchases. Again, visit birchgold.com/DREW. Some platforms have banned the discussion of controversial topics. This episode ends here. The rest of the show is available at drdrew.tv.
There's nothing in medicine that doesn't boil down to a risk-benefit calculation. It is the mandate of public health to consider the impact of any particular mitigation scheme on the entire population. This is uncharted territory, Drew.
Dr. Kelly Victory, our friend Ed Dowd.
Hey, Ed,
Hey,
so
Dr.
happy to have
Kelly.
you back. I always look forward to these conversations with you. Before I delve into the weeds on some of the new data and some of the bombshell stuff that we've gotten from these recent FOIA requests, I want to at least comment on Drew's question about that congressional hearing earlier this week. Yeah, Stephen Bancel, the CEO of Moderna, I think said the quiet part out loud, and I think Ed's exactly right. This is all money to them. They did the math. They said we can either sell 100 vaccines for $1 a piece, or we could sell one vaccine for $1 a piece. Doesn't really matter to us. And they have over all those people who are stuck under the thumb of different mandates, whether it's a university or an employer. And I think it's despicable. On top of that, yes, he refused to acknowledge what the president of Moderna said, apparently in private to Rand Paul, which is, yes, we acknowledge and that we knew that these vaccines would cause increased incidence of myocarditis. We don't dispute it. And Rand Paul called him out on that and said, the fact that you are not willing to say this in public is really, really despicable as well. And then the last thing that came out of it, I thought that was interesting, was that Bancel acknowledged paying $400 million to the NIH for their portion, their proceeds of the patent that the NIH owns in conjunction with Moderna. And he asked specifically, Rand Paul asked specifically to Bancel, do you think that a $400 million payment to the people who are responsible for determining how many of us need to take these vaccines, how often, do you think that could be a conflict of interest since they make money off of the very vaccines? And Bancel says, the government will need to opine on that. I mean, it was just talk about a spineless wonder. That was the guy. So really, really bad. Anyway, so Ed, before we came on, we're all talking about, I made the comment, and I really mean it, that in some ironic way, the fact that you are not a scientist, not a physician, I think has brought you an element of credibility in this discussion. As you said, prior to COVID, these are the kinds of robust, vigorous debates and due diligence and investigation that physicians would have into the data. But that was not allowed for a variety of reasons during COVID. So here you come along, a guy who's really expert at looking at patterns and numbers and, not a scientist at all. You bring this and you have become a sensation and frankly, a godsend to this entire debacle, because without your numbers, I'm not sure that people would be paying attention. And, you and I have discussed it between these shows, the number of hits that you've gotten, the amount of the viral nature of these shows. And so I do think there's a chink in the cognitive dissonance armor, and that people are listening. And I think what you're doing is critical. So dive in, if you will, start with where we left off in the previous discussions. What are you seeing next? What are you following in the most recent crunching of event data?
Yeah, so thank you for those comments. The team and I are currently doing all this pro bono. There's no one funding us. We have no paymasters to please. So, and we haven't even set up our hedge fund yet. And we kind of did that on purpose because we didn't want anybody to say that we were, directed by dark forces or money. This is all free, and it needed to be done. It needed to be done because it seems the regulators don't want to do it, and that's why we in the Humanity Project in our mission statement say we declare ourselves the watchdog of the watchdogs. I know that sounds arrogant, but this is where we are.
Yeah.
So what's the new data? The new data is there's three buckets that we've examined. The first bucket was excess deaths. I've also come on your show and talked about disabilities. There's a third bucket called vaccine injured. And that is, we were able to express those numbers through the US Bureau of Labor Statistics absence rates and work time lost. And next week, we're going to wrap all of these pieces together, tie it all together. And we got the vaccine damage report. We're going to put numbers, human cost, the numbers, which is probably low, and the dollar amount that it's cost the economy. I'll give you a little preview in the numbers after I present this data. But if you could go to chart 1, let's just leave that up while I speak to it. Chart 1 is what is absence data. It's yearly, it's annualized data. So it doesn't happen every month, but we did get the 2022 in the books. What absence data is it records an instance where, and these are full-time employees, ages 25 through 54, just so we know what we're looking at, what population. So full-time, 35 hours or more, absence, and it records the incidence of one absence. So the absence is 7 days, that's counted as one. If it's 2 days, it's counted as one. So it's a unit of one. That number went up 3 standard deviations off of trend, and the trend we tracked was from 2002 to 2019. So that established trend line, and you can see there it's been pretty steady, bouncing around. 3 standard deviations is still a big deal, but that you could make the case that happened in 2020. There were lockdowns, there was confusion, people had to scramble with school and all sorts of things. So that makes sense to us. What doesn't make sense is that in 2021, it persisted and went to 5 standard deviations. What makes absolutely no sense is the absence rate took off in 2022. And you can see the slope of the line, the rate of change accelerated to the upside in 2022. And that standard deviation was 11. That's just off the charts. Remember, a 3 standard deviation is once in a 200-year flood, as said by the insurance CEO, Scott Davison, and when he spoke about excess deaths. 3 standard deviations in my world is a big deal. In the finance world, it happens 0.03% of the time. So 2020 was a deviation, and that was a big deal. But 2022 is off the charts, and it's the persistence of trend that really bothers us. Now, I want to show you the next chart, chart 2. Scroll that. Yeah, there you go. So that's the absence rate increase year over year. So you can see it's gone up steadily to about 28% in 2022, and you can see it took a magnitude leap higher in 2022. So let's go to chart number 3 now, and we can now quantify this a little better. This is work time data. This is hours lost. So this is the number of hours lost per absence. And you can see that in 2020 and 2021, it was 7.5 standard deviations, which, again, 2020, you can make a case for that. 2021, with the introduction of the vaccines, it should have improved, but it went higher. But 2022 is really where it went 13 standard deviations off the rails. And again, 3 standard deviations is pretty rare. 13 is unheard of. So what is going on to cause this work time lost to be accelerated in 2022. We surmise, given our work in excess deaths and disabilities, that it's again the vaccines. Again, we're not doctors, but what we're hearing anecdotally and what we've seen in the literature is that this vaccine may compromise the immune system. And if so, it seems it's accelerated in 2022 with our workforce being constantly sick and calling in sick and missing work. So these are not disabled, these are injured. So this is what we think is a big deal, and it's a problem, and it affects the productivity of the economy. In addition to the disabled and dead, this is lost productivity, and also when you're not feeling well a lot, your cognitive abilities go down, and then the people around you that are well have to pick up your slack, and it causes burnout in those individuals as well. So this has knock-on effects we can't even quantify. And if I was a member of the CDC, I would say, hey, maybe the pandemic is in 2022, not 2020, statistically, because this is insane. Something's going on with our workforce that we've never seen before, and it's gone so far above trend. It's a health concern. And again, I'll say this: I believe this is the vaccines. If it's not, it needs to be talked about and investigated, because this is off the rails. And I'll stop.
I would argue that
Hold on.
that's the thing that's bothering me so much, which is that you came on before and talked about excess deaths. You've got guys like John Campbell, rattling the cage in the UK, and you see excess deaths brought up here and there in the Parliament and in the Congress. No, all I see is the data rolling downstream about post-COVID. It still doesn't explain excess deaths. It seems as though no one is even systematically asking the question: is it possible that no one is, because of the possibility of vaccine involvement, perhaps in it, that they have to be Homer Simpson pulling into the hedge? Is that what's preventing them from asking it systematically, or is somebody asking it systematically that just data's not coming forth yet?
I have not heard anybody talk about these numbers and talk about the disability numbers and the injury numbers taken together. The disability in the U.S., I'll give some previews for next week's report. So there's about 1.36 million disabled people in the workforce. And the injuries I just talked about is about 13.3 million. These are big numbers. So excess deaths are tragic, they're smaller. This is large. There's a large amounts of numbers here. About 5% of the total population. Higher if you look at the civilian labor force. About 10% of the civilian labor force. So this is something that I would suspect our institutions would be buzzing about and investigating and trying to figure out, because these numbers just look horrific to me as an analyst, and I would have thought there'd be some public health official screaming from the rooftops. It's crickets. I mean, it's crickets as far as I can tell. And there's talk of long COVID, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of funding for long COVID at the moment. I mean, if long COVID's causing this, there should be billions looking into it right now.
Well, and I think that the numbers continuing to go up in 2022, that's not what we're seeing with the trajectory of long COVID. Over time, those symptoms tend to get better, and so you should see a decrease in those numbers, not a continued increase. Secondly, you rightly point out, this is an area I know a lot about. I was the chief medical officer of quite a few Fortune 100 companies, and disability and absence numbers are critical. The presenteeism, what we call presenteeism, the number of people who go to work but who are not working at full functioning, is massive. When you have absentee numbers that are that high, I guarantee the presenteeism numbers, the people who show up at work but are functioning, 30% under their norm, is massive. And the financial impact to that, to a company, is huge. In other words, how many additional guys do you need to put on the line at Nissan to make up for the one guy who's working at less capacity, the error rates, and so those sorts of things. This is huge in terms of the financial impact to a company. Also, I think with regard to, we need to look now at what is it, you're saying there was nobody looking at this. We now know from this recently released data documents from the CDC that not only does the CDC know about this, they anticipated it prior to the rollout of the vaccines. They actually anticipated such a significant increase in adverse events from this vaccine that they hired an outside firm, General Dynamics, to manage the increase in data. They anticipated 1,000 adverse events a day back in December of before the vaccines were even rolled out. By January, back when most people had not taken a vaccine, by January, their own estimations of 1,000 adverse events a day were so off. They were having 4,500 a day. So many that General Dynamics said, we can't meet our contractual obligation to look at these, parse the data the way we said we would, because they're 4.5 times more than you had anticipated, CDC. Yet they kept all of this from the public. I mean, these numbers actually, I think, Ed, give absolute, they validate what you are finding in your numbers.
And I'd love to just show the last chart, chart 4, because this is stark. Chart 4 shows that work time lost is 50% higher than this is versus 2019. So you could see 2020, 2021 work hours lost, it jumped 50% to 50% above 2019 and 2022. So again, whatever's going on is accelerating in 2022 with a virus that is now nothing more than a cold and supposedly miracle vaccine. So, again,
I want to comment on that. Yeah, that's what I find interesting right now. And Kelly, I was wondering if you have seen this too. I've seen a concerted effort in the literature and in the public conversation to make people, there's things that I keep hearing in the public conversation, in the literature, that don't fit my clinical experience at all. One is Omicron is as bad as every other thing. Kids are in the ICU. Pregnant women are dying. Old people. I mean, at the very minimum, we live in the day of Paxlovid, which is, I would claim, helping things out a lot. And certainly, I think Pfizer would agree with that. People could argue about that. But at very minimum, we have that. Omicron is a totally different illness. And so much of this long COVID and data about disability around having had COVID was really hearkening back to Alpha and Delta, but they're trying to conflate it all. It's really kind of uncanny. So I'm seeing conflation of Omicron with Alpha and Delta, and I'm seeing like such rosy reports on the vaccine. It also doesn't fit my experience, where you see vaccine, there is vaccine injury. It happens pretty commonly, but you don't see that being discussed. Are you noticing those two trends as well?
Absolutely. I'm noticing those trends. Absolutely. And again, this data, this 50% rise in 2022 kind of blows what you just, this conflagration or
conflation. Yeah. The conflation of Omicron.
Conflation. Yeah. Sorry. I got tongue twisted. This conflation is definitely something that is very disturbing to me. And the numbers don't lend credence to this conflation at all.
I can tell you, I haven't, from a clinical perspective, I have not had a patient or known of a patient from my colleagues that we would have even recommend treatment with any of the vast number of treatment options that we have at hand, whether it's ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, steroids, nothing. Every single patient who I have seen in the past year with COVID has been treated successfully with over-the-counter medications like ibuprofen, some Robitussin if they've got a cough, decongestants, nothing.
Yeah.
These people have needed almost no treatment. They certainly haven't been hospitalized.
Yes, that version of Omicron is what went through our household, in fact. But I have
Didn't
seen
Jordan get Delta though? And then he was sick, but he was like, I stayed in the pool house for 2 years and got this cold. This is what I did this for.
Yeah, he got the Delta around the time I did, but
it was mild.
I did just for full transparency. I have seen a case in an unvaccinated man that it was in the time of Omicron. And it was nasty. I almost had trouble believing it was Omicron. I kept thinking, because not everything is Omicron. There is still Alpha and Delta flying around here and there. This guy had a nasty illness and it didn't feel like Omicron, but maybe it was. So the point is, maybe occasionally, but my experience predominantly has been the same as yours.
The other thing is, and I would say, and you can weigh in on this, Ed, is that, I think that many of these cases that they're even calling COVID are not actually COVID. For all you know, Drew, the guy who you're talking about had a positive PCR test, which is absolutely useless, and had something else, one of the other myriad respiratory viruses that go out there.
He
We
had
don't know what these
pulmonary
people.
emboli. He had cytokine activation. He had pulmonary emboli. He had something that looked like alpha, frankly, but maybe it was. It might have been alpha. Who knows?
Who knows? Maybe it was influenza.
Yeah.
Did we lose Ed here? Are we?
We just
Okay.
did. What happened there? I see is a
Yeah.
bizarre. But let's talk about this for a second. I mean, just the fact that there is the occasional severe Omicron or alpha that creeps in. And by the way, the big problem I had with that case, it was when Paxlovid was not being distributed. You remember, Paxlovid was being handed out the way vaccine was handed out initially. You had to meet certain criteria to have access to Paxlovid. I don't know if you remember that. And that went on for a few months where people like this guy, he could have been kept out of the hospital and said he's in with cytokine storm and pulmonary emboli because why? He didn't check the right boxes. It was disgusting. And so even he, with his moderate to severe illness, could have been prevented. It would be potentially prevented in today's world. So yeah, and
the
again,
reality
we can.
is
You and I.
Yeah, you may have a case here or there of somebody having severe illness, just like you can with influenza. But Ed's numbers are compelling because, number one, I just find it interesting that they match with what the CDC had anticipated. As I said, the CDC anticipated. Get your arms around this. Before the vaccines were rolled out, they hire an independent contractor to manage what they anticipate is the massive increase in reports of adverse events. They were predicting 1,000 a day, 40% of which
Kelly,
they anticipated would be serious. I mean,
and by the way,
this is evil.
Well, let's think about it this way. If they had been forthcoming, look, they rushed this thing to market. It was an emergency. They were willing to take risks they wouldn't otherwise take. Be honest about that. Hey, just don't hide that fact. Be honest about it. And then, by the way, now let's do the work to get the vaccine safety underway. And I don't know if you heard any of what we were talking about here, but we were, again, trying to, more fully understand your data. Let me ask this kind of silly question, I think, but I just got to put it out on the table. We have this weird, trend going on where people don't want to return to work and people are sort of, it's almost like they have, blew out, they sort of sick out themselves, particularly younger people. Were you seeing it more? Was there any age, I'm trying to figure out whether there was an impact of lockdown and people's general depression and difficulty working right now, which seems, I keep hearing about as a real thing.
Well, I'm not going to say that isn't part of it, but 13 standard deviations is insane. I mean, it's
a black swan, right? That's what you call that, a black swan, right? Yeah,
that's a black swan. So let's assume, let's pretend we didn't have a vaccine. The country would be talking about this. Every manager around the globe would be like, I can't hire anybody. And the people that show up.
That's the craziness. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That they're not talking about this is the craziness, right?
It is. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what's going on in the world. I work, in a small entrepreneurial company now, but if I was at BlackRock and I was a manager, I'd be saying, why can't people show up to work? What's going on? I'd be asking the question.
Ed, are you talking to the actual insurers? That there are disability insurers, life insurance. The actual. What are you hearing from those guys?
So the good news.
Themselves.
I want to talk about Josh Sterling. He was the gentleman who worked with me early on from Sanford Bernstein, insurance analyst for 7 years. He's formed a nonprofit called the Insurance Collaboration to Save Lives, and he has 40 executives from around the insurance industry. He just got an article in AM Best to talk about it. They're going to explore everything that's going on because it is a crisis, and they're not naming the vaccine, but they're saying we're not leaving any stone unturned. It's to get as many people under the umbrella as possible. And after this article, he's now having more insurance executives reach out. So what I suspect is going on is the denial is dissipating. And my whistleblower that has been with me the whole time that's in the insurance industry, that's a chief actuary. This person is finally saying light is starting to dawn on some people's heads there, and there's internal discussion. So the good news is the insurance industry is waking up quick, which I mean they have to. I mean these are the people that need to sue the pharmaceutical industry, in my opinion.
Yeah, one of the questions that I got asked a lot early on, and I don't have a good answer to it, is, if they determine that these are vaccine-induced injuries, is there any change in the liability for the health insurer or the life insurer or the disability insurer to actually pay out, on these things if these end up, how does that work?
Does that
I
work?
think
Yeah.
You
I
understand?
think I think I think they need to pay out. I don't think they can. I don't think they can get a legal loophole, the insurance companies. But if it's ever determined that there was fraud in the clinical trials, then that might put the insurance industry against the pharmaceutical industry. Again, I believe personally there's clinical trial fraud, but that's a whole other can of worms. I'm just counting the ones and zeros. But if
Yeah.
fraud can be proven. Um, then their immunity goes the way of the dodo bird because fraud vitiates all contracts.
Well, that's been my stance exactly, and I agree with you. I think that there's unassailable evidence of clinical trial fraud, and that they had information that they withheld, specifically withheld from the advisory committees, for example. Even just the acknowledgement of the CDC that they were anticipating a massive increase in daily reporting of adverse events from these things, and they acknowledged that they expected 40% of them to be serious. You're talking about they were anticipating 400 serious events a day. And they what actually happened blew their expectations out of the water. So, but I do think if you could prove fraud, then yeah, it changes the onus of responsibility, perhaps to the pharmaceutical companies. But I wasn't sure how the life insurers were freaking out when it first occurred that there was a 40% increase in mortality in these people. What's going on? Are these disability insurers even able to stay afloat? Are they
Well,
solvent?
so with group life, that's where it showed up first. Group life has much shorter accounting duration, so the group life policies got hit. So what did they do before they? I mean, they were still in the dark about potential causes. They just raised prices, so they priced through this issue, which has an economic impact on all the rest of us. In their whole life policies, which are much bigger face amounts. These are people who get $10 million insurance policies. Um, they have not changed their long-term mortality assumptions yet. They're still banking on
Okay.
excess deaths trending back towards zero. If that doesn't happen in several quarters, maybe a year, huge underwriting losses are coming. They have to basically
Yeah.
reserve against future losses, and that'll hit them. So I look, the problem with this is there's knock-on effects for everybody. This is going to cost every business more in premiums they have to pay to insurance companies across the board, and it's a hit. I mean, insurance is necessary, but it's also can be a drag on the economy if insurance rates double to get health insurance, disability.
Right.
This is a
Right.
nightmare for the common man, the middle American wage earner. It's not good.
Yeah, well, I think that if we are right, and that I've been predicting this massive increase not only in autoimmune issues but specifically cancers as a result of immune suppression, it's going to put an unbelievable drain on the healthcare system in general at a time when we've had unprecedented numbers of healthcare workers leaving the workforce either by choice or because they've become disabled. I mean, the whole thing together, it is a perfect storm for a disaster, not only for the insurance companies, but for the system as a whole. Have you gotten any traction or have you been working with anybody in Congress, whether it's a Rand Paul or a Ron Johnson or anybody who's willing to look at your data? Are you talking with those guys about the data? I know many of them undoubtedly follow you, on whether it's social media or other appearances. But have you had any real, in the trench communication with them?
The only one I've had in the trench communication with was Senator Ron Johnson. The sad news is the Senate's not in power. So the power resides in the House, and there is a COVID congressional committee being formed. I've been told Marjorie Taylor Greene is the person. I've asked people to get me in touch with her so I can talk to her. And I'll talk to anybody that wants to have me. I'll fly to Washington, D.C. I'll present the data and do what I can, but no one's called me. And I'm doing the best I can to get the word out, getting in as many media outlets as possible to just make people aware of what I think is going on.
Because as I
Hey,
said,
Ed,
and I
real
really
quick,
mean this, I
Kelly.
think.
Go
Okay,
ahead,
go
finish your
ahead.
thought, but then I want to ask Ed something. Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say,
Finish your thought.
I think the fact that you're not a physician, that you're not a scientist, that you're simply saying, here are the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. Here are the numbers, and you are obligated to come up with some explanation for these numbers. You know, I have my thoughts about what they could be, but you are obligated to address this. This is a crisis of unprecedented, proportions, and it needs to be addressed. So the idea that Congress isn't all over this like white on rice is beyond
Isn't
me.
that
I
weird?
mean, you have,
It's so weird.
yeah.
But again, I have so many times during this pandemic, I'm going, what? How? It's insane. What? How's this possible? This is another one of those moments. But Ed, do you have any updates for us on your original data? Kelly asking about the insurance situation made me think about some of the things you were originally reporting to us from funeral homes and life insurance and actuarial data. Is there anything new? Has anything changed there? Because I've actually checked in with. I'm not finding anecdotal stuff on the funeral homes and the autopsy reports and things. What are you getting on your numbers?
So I'll give you some color. So my insurance actuary who sees the Society of Actuary numbers gave me a heads up. So the last numbers we had was as of the second quarter of 2022. Let's focus on group. Again, this is group life millennials 25 through 44. They were running at around 23% excess mortality, which is still horrific. I'm being told that the third quarter. Yeah, I'm being told that the third quarter is 23%, but
These are young
the
people.
fourth quarter.
Young people.
Yeah, yeah. I'm being told the fourth quarter accelerated, and we don't have the final numbers in, but it looks like the fourth quarter is going to be up. And apparently the month of December was way worse than the month of November and October. And then she told me that January was worse than December and February was worse than January. But the good news is March seems to be improving. So what I suspect is going on is there is some seasonality associated with this, but that has to do with the immune system being compromised during winter flu season. So again, young people shouldn't be dying at this rate. I mean, 25 through 44 in group life policy holders, because they are working at Fortune 500, mid-sized companies, and the Society of Actuaries has proven that this cohort, ages 25 through 64, die at 1/3 the mortality of the general U.S. population. So this shouldn't be happening. These are the elite of the elite, the most healthiest, best access to healthcare. That's one of my big theories of the case here, is that the employed of our country have been had worse health outcomes than the overall population, which doesn't happen
Because of mandates?
Because of mandates and vaccines. So that's my thesis. So typically speaking, before 2021, if you're part of the civilian labor force and the employed labor force, your health is generally better than the overall general population. That makes sense. So, but this inverted in 21 and 22, and it makes no sense to me.
One of the things I think is interesting, and you were talking about it before I came on, is that other countries, and now most recently Australia, whose take on this was, get vaccinated or off with your head, until just recently, and now they've done a 180 and are no longer recommending boosters for healthy people under the age of 60. Not just little kids. They are scrambling to get on the right side of history, from what I can
Including
tell.
pregnant women, which is interesting.
Yeah. Do you have a theory, Ed, for why is it that the United States and Canada just, won't pick up the clue phone? It's ringing away and they just won't pick it up. Other countries are retrenching on their,
And let me pile
their
on
mandates.
that, Kelly. some of the countries that are pulling back are ones that were sort of bellwethers for the American sort of, the Danish and the Swedish and the Australians.
Well,
These
that's
are
what I'm
people
saying.
that
The
they were pointing at.
Australians.
Look what
That's
they're
what
doing. Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. The
Yeah.
Australians were all in. So, do you have a theory for what's going on there?
Well, I will echo what you said. Carlos and Yuri are from Portugal. And when we started seeing the countries pulling back, they said, Ed, usually the US leads. Why are they lagging?
Yeah,
And I
right.
suspect because Pfizer and Moderna are US companies and we push these vaccines so hard. And there seems to be a linkage between the government, the DoD, and these companies. So that's one theory. Why is Canada doing it? Well, Canada, I'm going to make a joke about Canada. They seem to be a third world country at the moment. They can't even count the number of dead. Their death data is months behind. So this is Banana Republic stuff going on in Canada. And that's all I'll say about Canada. I love my Canadian friends, but your government, there's something going on there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I say the same thing to my Canadian friends. Like, love you guys, but how the heck could you have voted for what you got there? Where are you? What's next on your? What are you focusing on now? Is it just watching more data rolling in, or is there another way? Is there another thing that would be yet a way to look at this other than disability and death data? What else are you looking at?
Well, so that this is what we're looking at now. We're gonna maybe look at other databases as they come. I'm gonna be having a discussion with a company that has a database that, if the numbers are good, we might get a little more granular. We stayed away from, you know, different instances of how this presents itself because that's just
Hmm. Hmm.
again, we're not doctors. But if we get some other databases, we'll look at that. We're also, again, next week we're going to drop the economic numbers on this. We're going to show the actual damage that can be associated from what we believe is the vaccine, the cost to the economy, and if it's not the vaccine, the cost of the ongoing pandemic. Because whatever people say about this pandemic, these numbers suggest it never ended. It's getting worse. How's
Yeah.
that for a way to
Yeah.
reframe this debate? The numbers are worse now than
Yeah.
they were in 2020. So why are we in emergency lockdown right now? That's a question I'd like to ask the Congress and the CDC and NIH because these numbers are worse than 2020.
Oh God, don't give them any ideas. They'll probably take us next thing you know. But that's the reality. And I think a lot of people don't connect the dots, interestingly, between what we're seeing economically and the lockdown. People don't understand that, the vast majority of issues we're having with supply chain are a direct result of the lockdown. And I think that we're paying the price for that.
Yeah, and this is tragic, and I would love to go before Congress and testify. I mean, I'm willing to do it, and I'll take all the slings and arrows that come my way because I'm just the numbers guy, and I have no skin in this game. We've all done this for free. So if I'm wrong, prove me wrong. But I'm again,
Yeah.
if this was a stock, I'd be up to my eyeballs. This would be the biggest position in my portfolio. That's how right I think I am.
No, well, obviously, I think you are as well. When you spoke to Ron Johnson, was he willing to make an introduction to get you? You need to be in front of Congress.
Yeah, no, I'm in contact with him, and he's a great
Okay.
guy. He's been
Yes.
on the vanguard of this. But again, he's in the Senate, and I need someone from Congress to reach out to me, the House.
Yeah.
Can I get we have a lot of hands up here want to ask questions, so I'm going to try to bring somebody up if you guys are up for that. This is Timothy, and see if he wants to comment
And
on
we
here.
love Ron Johnson too. He's been on the show with us too. So I agree. He's been a real warrior.
Timothy, just unmute that mic. Your hand is up on the lower left corner, and you're up. There you go, Timothy.
Awesome.
What's going on?
Thank you.
Mhm.
Appreciate you taking my call. I was thinking the other day, Twitter Spaces is like the new radio host call.
Very similar. It's very similar,
Yeah.
and it's and yet weirdly different. It's all weirdly different, but it is
Yeah,
the same idea.
definitely.
That's for sure. So
Sure. I'll try to be brief. So I work in the Bay Area in biotech, but so this isn't the following isn't my area of expertise, but I've been tracking general emergencies in airlines, and Yeah, I just wanted to mention that as to the along the same vein of Ed's comments about missing work or ability to do one's work well. In 2022 compared to 2018 and 19 averaged, there were 272% more general emergencies. Now, those may not all be medical, but that's a bit concerning. And it's actually not getting better, but getting worse so far in 2023. These emergencies are the Squawk 7700. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there in terms of, just do the,
And
it
Tim,
makes me wonder about
it
what
makes you wonder. And
impacts
Tim,
that.
there was a recent Southwest pilot that had some sort of cardiac event, during flight.
Several, yeah.
And we
A lot
hear
of
these things. Yeah,
incapacitations
steer a
of late.
lot of these things now. And again, the literature is starting to make the case that this is all post-COVID, but doesn't pass the sniff test of what everyone is seeing clinically. It's just sort of, it certainly could be both vaccine and COVID. Very hard to tease these things out right now. But I agree with you. And
It
certainly,
is.
Kelly, you remember we talked with, I'm blanking on her name right now, that had the military data. Certainly it was borne out there. Teresa.
Lieutenant
Colonel
Colonel
Long,
Teresa
yeah.
Long,
Lieutenant Colonel Long.
who said that
Teresa
she
Long.
said that on any given day she had to ground 100% of the pilot patients she saw for vaccine related, which she presumed were vaccine related.
And she was clear. Yeah. Well, it was pretty
Very
clear it
clear.
was vaccine in her case, at least what she was saying.
Yeah.
But that's the stuff we're seeing, and my goodness, it got a lot of hands up here. I'm able to try to get one or so more. This is.
I like what Tim did. Tim is doing what a lot of people do. It's anecdotal evidence. You start to think critically. Something's changed. That's what I did early on. So Tim is, I want to see more people in the country start to critically think, and Tim did that, and he's onto something. And I'm sure there's if he got enough samples from across the country, he could probably write his own report. I mean, this is the kind of thing we need.
Yeah, doctors used to do that, Ed, back in the olden days.
Right.
Before
that's
before
right.
They
we
got
used
caught
to
up in
we used to talk about our clinic. We used to talk about our clinical experience. It meant something.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. So JP, you gotta unmute your mic in the lower left hand corner there, and we should have you. Sometimes that just doesn't happen for reasons that are somewhat obscure to us. There you are.
I think I lost signal.
Nope, you're back.
There you go.
We got you. Can you hear us? We hear you.
This is very frustrating.
Yes, we agree with that, my friend. Sorry about that. Let's just let me look here. I have to check everything out here. 1 second. Let's get Nazrat. I'm not sure what his name is here, but whoops. The one difference between this and radio is this is a much more cumbersome process. That is for sure.
Yeah, Twitter Spaces
That
needs to add a call screener feature so I can do it on my side. Like they need to add someone to moderate it. I can line people up.
I just heard a blip. I think you got
and
somebody
then-
on the line.
Yeah, no, he's there. He's there. I've got him, but he's got to. There's this process where they have to get hooked up, which has a delay. Then they unmute their mic. Then it mutes again on its own. Then they have to re-unmute it. And so let's see if you can get that lower left-hand microphone. Oh, now mine muted. How about that? Mine just muted. So that was interesting. So people didn't hear anything I said.
It's a ghost.
So Nazrat, as I see here, go ahead, unmute your mic and speak. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we can. No, that
I
one
could
just
hear
left.
him, but it sounded like he was out in the middle of a field with a lot of crickets.
Yeah, I give right now on what's going on here technically with Twitter Spaces. I'm going to give up on that.
Somewhere in the in the Ozarks.
We will have a show coming up soon where I will just
Fireflies.
take calls. I promise we will do that because then it's people line up a little differently and it's more, we can move through more calls that way. But we are sort of towards the end of our time. Yeah, you? Well, I can find another one.
Come on,
but
Drew, you can do this.
that
I know
what
you
you
can
want?
do it.
Yeah.
You can do it.
If that's what you guys want, we are going to try to do it.
He likes things to flow. He doesn't want to have any dead space, so he
That's
gets
the
nervous.
radio head in my brain. JP, I'm trying you again. You were the one that was saying it was so frustrating. I'm gonna give you a chance to come back on here. Can you hear us? You should be up. And this is my producer to put me up to this guy, so we'll see how this
I
goes.
know. Unmute your mic.
His
There
thing is
a lag.
unmuted. Is the thing it's unmuted.
Maybe he's in the bathroom or something.
No, I think it's, if you've ever been on these Twitter spaces, the larger ones, you'll hear glitches, you'll hear things get weird. Let's try Stephen.
Yeah.
Whoops.
It's not terrestrial radio, Drew. It's just the way it is.
There you go.
I'm just saying, we'll get there. This is new technologies. Yeah, you heard Stephen?
I heard a bloop.
Stephen.
I heard a blip.
Is that me?
That's
Yay!
you.
Hello, Stephen.
There you
Welcome.
go.
Stephen.
Stephen, hi. Back in the old days when we were trying to figure out how much to spend on an illness, the statistician helps us with a figure called qualities per dolly. And it's basically quality adjusted life years saved per dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't spend an infinite amount of money saving a person for a year. That's why many state Medicare programs won't pay for liver transplants, for instance. You have to save the maximum number of lives and the maximum number of years for the money you have, which is always finite. The problem is that with COVID, we never did that.
Right.
And
That's right.
somebody, they didn't think about it, but we spent something like $10 trillion. And let's suppose we saved 1 million people, which I sort of doubt we did.
Agreed.
But let's say 1 million people, which is an upper limit. Divide 10 trillion by 1 million, and it's like $10 million a piece.
Yeah.
We
wild.
can't afford that. We can't afford no medical system can afford that. That's what we did.
But that Ed is Stephen, rather, that is consistent with their thinking, where they did no risk reward analysis of any type. So there was zero risk reward. And by the way, back, we have discovered now that this pandemic preparedness industry did not think in terms of this sort of thing. It seems like it just prepared a whole bunch of hammers ready for where a nail popped up. And man, when that nail popped up, they just started hammering. And at no point was anything else contemplated. And that's the great scandal in all this, above all else, in my humble opinion. Stephen is a physician. He's also a chemist, and he's been working in these areas. Stephen, any other insights you have?
No, that's it. I just want to say that before we have the next epidemic, we should do some hard thinking about this.
Oh my God, yes. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
You
and
bet.
the comment, what I would say to Stephen's point is exactly right. And in my intro piece, you always hear me saying it is the mandate of public health to consider the impact of any mitigation scheme on the entire population. You can't just say if we save one life, because the lockdown may save a handful of lives. Whatever, the vaccine may save a handful of lives, but you have to look at the impact on the entire population, and not just their physical health, emotional health, psychological health, financial health. Of course. We harmed UNICEF predicted that 250 million children worldwide starved to death as a result of the lockdowns and food chain, supply chain interruptions. Think about that.
Yeah.
So, you save a couple of kids from COVID while you starve 250,000. Bad calculus.
This was the insanity. Insanity.
Doctor,
you got something to say?
Yeah, Dr. Drew said something interesting, which ties into my conspiracy of interest. He said the pandemic business. So there was this lurking entities that were ready to go when something came, and when they began, it became a business, and the momentum just went. And it seemed like a bunch of different verticals jumped at the opportunity. Tech with the surveillance cash flows, media with the nonstop ads from the pharmaceutical industry, and the government, just power grab. And those are the verticals. And then the pharmaceutical industry was just excited about mandating a product under the color of law. I mean, you have a captive audience. I mean, this vaccine is the most successful consumer product in the history of the world.
Don't forget the healthcare system, Ed. The fact that they were getting an additional $40,000 for every admission for COVID.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
But you guys,
don't leave
honest
them out.
you, I have a lecture I've been giving for years about the opioid pandemic and how that happened. And it is line and verse the same thing as this. There were anti-pain evangelists, there were opioid evangelists, They developed a discipline called pain medicine that had as their core discipline, pain is what the patient says it is, pain control is what the patient says it is, and opiates are a godsend, and the pharmaceutical company are our perfect partner to allow us to do our God's work. And that you do when clinical people take an evangelical approach to anything, the amount of harm they can do is untold. But who gets behind them are the business entities and the regulatory agencies, and just blow winds. They're like a gale force wind into the sails of those evangelists. Yeah. I dare anybody to find anything different about this, the pandemic preparedness, and the pain issue of the 90s and early 2000s. Same exact fucking thing. Excuse me. Hope I don't get YouTube canceling me.
Great analogy. Great analogy. Yeah. That's a fabulous analogy.
Yep. So guys, watch out. We'll keep these conversations going. Ed, we're going to let you go. And Kelly and I are going to talk about what's coming up. But please, if anything new comes along, I hope you will join us again, even if it's for just a quick update. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I could do a quick update next week with the dollar amounts. It's going to be iPhone, and we'll talk.
100%. Love that.
Yep.
Love that. Maybe really Friday, actually. Friday would be really good. So we'll check in with you then. Okay.
Yeah, I can do next Friday.
And then.
Okay.
All right, Susan,
awesome.
You got that?
I'll circle back.
Friday, Ed Dowd. She's busy. She gave me the go away sign. So
I have ADD.
So Kelly, you and I we got canceled on Tuesday, right? Or Wednesday, both.
Yes, Bobby.
Moved to Tuesday and then canceled on Tuesdays.
Yeah, we're going to be rescheduling. Bobby
1 p.m.
Yeah. Bobby Kennedy can't do Tuesday. Okay. So I'm going to be rescheduling him. He's excited to come back, but can't do it on Tuesday the 28th.
We did it too far in advance for him.
But Kelly, I'm really anxious about talking to him again. I get a lot of grief.
We have to do it closer to the date so it doesn't get canceled. That's the only problem when you book somebody like this in advance. But we will have a show at 1 p.m. Not the guest TBA.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
So I guess
it might just be
you and I just learned we're doing a show at 1 o'clock on Tuesday Pacific time. So that's what's going to happen.
I'm there. Okay.
And then on Monday, I'm going to speak to. Good. Okay. Monday, I'm going to speak to. I want to get her name right. Astrid. I'm not going to come up with it. Oh, here it is. Astrid Leffringhausen. And one of the reasons I spoke to Dr. Mail, Vicky Mail, who was a very enthusiastic supporter of vaccines for pregnant women and women generally. Dr. Leffringhausen is from Australia, and she had some alternative data that she wanted to go over. So I wanted to give both sets of data an opportunity to come before you here, and then you can decide for yourselves. The only thing I would say about Dr. Mail's stuff, which was, it was compelling data. It was too rosy on the vaccine side, didn't fit reality. And then she conflated, though tried to find a way out of it later on Twitter. I noticed she was kind of addressing this particular criticism. Omicron from Alpha and Delta. Omicron is just not that bad. It just isn't. Kelly, am I overstating anything with that?
Well, with regard to Omicron being, a fraction of the lethality and severity of the illness to the previous strains, including, Alpha and Delta, there's no question that's the case. But with regard to Vicky Mail and her stance on these vaccines, it simply doesn't comport with what we are seeing with regard to huge increases in intrauterine fetal demise, stillbirths, premature rupture of membranes.
Well, this is the part. This is the thing. She had. You're right, and I've seen that data too. And she had large cohorts where she didn't have that, and that's a problem. We need to figure out why one set of data doesn't show it, one set of data does show it. So that's important. Well, we kind of keep our eye on that till we sort it out.
Well, you can always go to the default, Drew, which is to look at birth rates around the world, and they are massively down in countries. It correlates directly with the level of vaccination. Meaning the most heavily vaccinated countries have the biggest impact on their birth rates.
Interesting.
Most of Western Europe is down between 3% and 8%. Places like Taiwan down 26%, and places like Sub-Saharan Africa, which are fundamentally unvaccinated, have had no change in their birth rates. So they certainly had COVID, by the way. They had COVID, Drew. So it's not, they had COVID at the same rate the rest of us did, but their birth rates are unaffected. So
interesting.
You are left to really answer what that's coming from, and obviously, I believe it's related to the vaccines. But Vicky Mail doesn't have an alternate explanation for it. So there's that.
If I can ask something real quick,
so
I wonder if, because I'm not a medical person at all. So is there anything that tracks? So I'm trying to think of like the global stress level on just the population of different countries in the world, and how there's nothing that can track that. It's like anxiety of everyone peaked so much that perhaps people just aren't having kids in this time, and maybe that's also affecting the numbers, because this has been very stressful for especially people in my age group, but between 20s and mid 30s. Usually would be having kids.
Yes.
A lot of people I know have just like,
so
they're
listen,
so stressed.
I was telling somebody today, I was on another call, that I think I told Susan this story. I had dinner with Greg Gutfeld the other night, and I was driving to meet with him, and I was driving down Fifth Avenue. I'm like, oh my God, New York is back. The stores are all open and people are out on the street. And I was by Washington Square and there are people out there. I almost burst into, I had this overwhelming desire to cry. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And I thought, and it was confusing. It was such a conflicted feeling. On one hand, it was a joy that everything seemed to be kind of opening up again. But on the other hand, there was this feeling that, it's not really normal. And what the hell did we just do to ourselves? It was this strange, conflicted feeling. And I've never really felt like bursting into tears like that, ever. I don't think I can remember ever feeling like that. So it's all of us, and it's a lot. And and I would argue that a lot of it was unnecessary. And certainly that's what you and I are learning, I think, Kelly.
Absolutely. But I agree with what you're saying, Drew. I hear from people all the time, this overwhelming sense of, oh my gosh, is it over? Is it finally over? It's like when you watch people, when the war is over, they open the internment camp, they open the POW camp, and people kind of say like, oh my God, is this real? Am I actually getting out? Is my life back on the rails? But it's not an immediate sense of real relief. I think what you're saying, Caleb, is absolutely legitimate. People have been overwhelmingly stressed. I quipped early on in the pandemic that, normally, frankly, when you tell people you can't go to work, you can't go to school, you can't travel, you must stay in your house, lots of times they find other things to do. And that ends up in an increase in the birth rate. People generally, when locked indoors, snowstorms, and there's a reason why, when there's bad winters in the Northeast, 9 months later, there's an increase in the birth rate. It's kind of the nature of humans. I think this was different, however, because people became fundamentally so stressed early on. They may have been having a more procreative activity going on. But I think as this lockdown wore on, people started saying, first of all, get out of my space. I don't want to see my spouse as much as I'm seeing them right now. We're all locked in this house together, and it's, not really giving me the warm fuzzies. So I think there clearly could be some component of that. But it happens to tie, as I said, absolutely directly to the rates of vaccination in particular countries. And so, correlation does not prove causation. Believe me, I know all of this, but I find it interesting.
And this probably, I didn't even think about this point,
Caleb, to your point, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to kill my whole point right here, because I totally didn't connect the fact that we actually did have a baby in the pandemic. So she got pregnant in a pandemic. So this may kill my point. I was just curious, knowing how stressed my friends are.
No, your point is well taken. Point is well taken. The psychiatric literature is overwhelmingly replete with data of depression, anxiety, suicide, substance use. It's out of control. So it's not as though there's some sort of global measure, but there is the psychiatric data is just beyond, you can't even imagine how bad it is, number one. Number two, I just started thinking about it. Whenever you saw, movies or newsreels about World War II, London had been bombed. Yeah. The next day, people came out of their house and started doing things to try to make a difference. We were told to stay in our room for a year. I can't think of any time in history There's no war, no nothing, where people have had to stay in a shelter-in-place mode. Shelter-in-place is a transient thing when there's a nuclear weapon heading your way,
right,
or there's an active shooter outside. It's not a state of being. Look, there's a reason we put people in solitary confinement as the ultimate punishment. People do poorly when they're isolated socially. And this has got to be examined for what it was, which was a really serious catastrophe. You can defend it for a while, but that it went on the way it did in many states is it's just reprehensible. So before we go on, let's kind of wrap up. We'll just keep gushing, Kelly. So Thank you for being here. And as always, it's fun to talk to Ed. And we will see you on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, Susan, correct? 1 o'clock Pacific time?
Yes.
Tuesday at 1 o'clock, Kelly. See you then.
Okay. All right. See you then. Have a good.
Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help. Feels like a horrible violation.
Yeah, I know.
And especially your first time. Were you embarrassed?
No, I was actually kind of proud of it. I was like, man, this is like the coolest thing I've ever done.
Was your boyfriend like hiding his face? Or?
No, we were kind of giggling, and I'm just like, we're going to jail. And then
there is a Disney jail. There's a whole.
They took us to it. They took us to the Disneyland jail.